October 12, 1961, 8:15 p.m. Lenox Avenue, Harlem, New York. The charcoal gray Cadillac Fleetwood 60 Special slid through the Harlem twilight like a shark through deep water, its chrome fins slicing the autumn air. Inside, the scent of expensive leather and my wife Mamie's perfume, Chanel No. 5, always, was a fragile bubble of luxury against the city's exhaust and pretzel's breath. I was Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson, and on these streets, my name was its own form of currency, its own brand of law. Tonight, however, I was not Bumpy the Kingpin, the numbers man, the arbiter of Harlem's complex underworld. Tonight, I was just a father, a husband, taking my family downtown. In the back seat, my daughter, Elise, sat between Mamie and me. At 16, she was balanced on that impossible, beautiful fulcrum between childhood and womanhood. She wore a pale blue dress that Mamie had spent a week fussing over, her hair pressed and gleaming under the passing streetlights. It was her birthday, a sweet 16 worthy of a princess, Mamie had insisted. And in Harlem, Elise was a princess. Here, she was insulated, protected, revered not for my reputation but for her own light. She was a scholar, a poet, her mind as sharp and brilliant as the diamonds I'd gifted Mamie, which now sparkled at my wife's throat. "Are you excited, baby girl?" I asked, my voice softer than the one I used for business. Elise nodded, her eyes wide with the anticipation of a child promised a trip to the moon. "The Copacabana, Daddy. I've only ever seen it in magazines. Frank Sinatra sings there." "He does?" I confirmed, patting her hand. "And tonight, you'll be sitting at the best table in the house. A little birthday magic from your old man." She squeezed my hand, a gesture of pure, uncomplicated love that felt more valuable than every dollar I had stacked in every safe across the city. This was why I did it. The grinding, the risks, the moral compromises, it was all for this. For this bubble. For the ability to give my daughter a world where she never had to see the ugliness I navigated daily. My driver and most trusted man, Junie Bird, caught my eye in the rearview mirror. His expression was placid, professional, but I knew him. He was worried. Junie knew the world outside of Harlem didn't play by Harlem's rules. Downtown, my name wasn't law. It was a target. "Everything set, Junie?" I asked, a low rumble of command returning to my voice. "Yes, sir, Bumpy." Called ahead. Spoke to the maitre d'. "Your reservation is confirmed. Table right by the stage." I nodded, satisfied. I had greased the right palms, made the right calls. Money was supposed to be the great equalizer, the solvent that dissolved even the stubborn stain of prejudice. I had sent a man 2 days prior with $500, an obscene amount for a reservation, just to ensure the night was seamless. For Elise, it had to be. October 12, 1961, 9:05 p.m. The Copacabana, 10 East 60th Street, Manhattan. The line outside the famous nightclub was a glittering serpent of New York's elite. Men in sharp tuxedos and women in furs and jewels huddled under the iconic canopy, their laughter like the clinking of champagne glasses. We bypassed the line, as arranged. Junie opened the door, and I stepped out, a king arriving at a foreign court. I helped Mamie out, her elegance a quiet rebuke to the gawking stares. Then came Elise, her face a mask of awe as she looked up at the glowing sign. I put a protective hand on the small of her back and guided my family toward the velvet rope. The doorman, a slab of a man with a face like a tombstone, barely glanced at us. The real gatekeeper was a man in a pristine tuxedo standing just inside the lobby. Jules Podell, the owner, a man infamous for his temper and his rigid, unwritten rules about who was, and was not, welcome in his establishment. I had been assured my money had smoothed this path. I gave him my name. Johnson, reservation for 3-inch. Podell, a short, bulldog of a man with cold, assessing eyes, looked from me to Mamie, and then his gaze landed on Elise. His lip curled, a subtle, almost imperceptible sneer. It was a look I had seen 1,000 times in my life. The look of a man who believes you are an insect he has found crawling on his white tablecloth. He consulted a large book on his lectern, making a show of running his finger down the page. He did it twice. "Don't see it," he said, his voice flat, dismissive. He didn't look at me when he spoke. My blood went cold, then hot. Check again. It was made Tuesday. Bumpy Johnson. I let my name hang in the air, a threat sheathed in civility. In my world, saying my name twice was a final warning. Podell finally lifted his eyes to mine. There was no fear in them, only a flat, smug certainty. I heard you the first time. You're not in the book. And even if you were, he gestured vaguely at my family, a flick of the wrist that dismissed our entire existence. We're at capacity. Private party. It was a lie. A blatant, naked lie spat in my face. The line of white patrons was still filing in behind us. I could feel Elise shrink beside me. I could feel Mamie's hand tighten on my arm, a silent plea to let it go, to leave, to not make a scene. But the insult wasn't for me. It was for my daughter. He was looking at her hopeful, birthday-bright face, and telling her she was not good enough to breathe the same air as Frank Sinatra. He was taking my power, my money, my name, and rendering them all worthless in front of the one person I needed to believe I was invincible. There seems to be a misunderstanding, I said, my voice dangerously low. I kept my hands unclenched at my sides, a Herculean effort of will. I sent a man. He paid. Podell laughed. A short, ugly bark. Your money's no good here, fella. Now take your family and get out of my lobby. You're holding up the line. He turned his back on me. The world narrowed to a pinprick. The laughter of the crowd, the distant music from inside the club, the chill of the October night, it all faded. All I could see was Podell's back. All I could feel was my daughter's dream dying at my feet. I had built an empire of fear and respect, walled off a piece of the world to keep her safe, and in one instant, this cheap thug with a velvet rope had torn it all down. He hadn't just slammed a door in my face. He had slammed it in my soul. He had shown my daughter that her father, the mighty Bumpy Johnson, was just another Negro that some white man could turn away at the door. And in that moment, I was utterly, completely powerless. The shock wasn't that it happened. The shock was the look on Elise's face as she realized it. The light in her eyes flickered and went out. From the recollections of Junie, Bird, recorded 1988. I was there. I saw the whole thing. I was waiting by the car, but I saw it through the glass doors. I saw the way that fellow Podell looked at Mr. Johnson, at Mrs. Johnson, and at little Elise. It wasn't just, no coloreds allowed, it was deeper. It was personal, like he enjoyed it. I saw Mr. Johnson stand in there, and for the first time in my life, I saw him look small. He was always the biggest man in any room, not in size, but in gravity. He pulled the whole room into his orbit. But that night, that little bouncer turned owner, he pushed Mr. Johnson right out. I saw Elise's shoulders slump. That's what killed him. Not the insult to him, the hurt to her. When they came back out, Mrs. Johnson was trying to hold it together, but Elise, her face was just blank, empty, like a doll's face. Mr. Johnson didn't say a word. He just got in the car. I've seen that man face down hitmen, crooked cops, a grand jury. I've never seen him scared. But on that ride back to Harlem, he was terrified. October 12, 1961, 9:45 p.m., the Henry Hudson Parkway. The ride back to Harlem was the longest of my life. The bubble had been burst. Silence filled the Cadillac, thick and suffocating. Mamie kept trying to catch my eye, to offer some silent solace, but I couldn't look at her. I could only stare at the back of Junie's head, at the city lights blurring past, each one a testament to a world I could influence, but never truly own. My shame was a physical thing, a lead weight in my gut. It wasn't the shame of being denied entry. It was the shame of a father who had made a promise and failed to keep it. I had promised her a magical night, and instead, I had given her a lesson in the world's casual cruelty. Elise hadn't said a word. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in the lap of her beautiful blue dress. She wasn't crying. It would have been better if she were. Crying is a release. This was something else. A retreat. A shutting down. I had seen it before in soldiers coming back from the war, a look they called the 1,000-yard stare. My 16-year-old daughter was looking at me, but she was a million miles away. When we arrived back at our brownstone on Astor Row, she was the first one out of the car. She walked up the steps without looking back, her posture ramrod straight. The birthday girl, returning from the ball before the clock had even struck 10. October 12, 1961, 11:30 p.m. My study, Astor Row, Harlem. Mamie found me in my study, a glass of whiskey in my hand, the bottle on the desk beside me. The room was my sanctuary, paneled in dark wood, filled with books on history and philosophy. It was where I came to think, to strategize. Tonight, it felt like a cage. "Ellsworth," she said softly, her hand on my shoulder. "It wasn't your fault, wasn't it?" I turned to her, and I let her see it. The crack in the facade. The utter, soul-crushing defeat. I took her there, Mamie. I put that hope in her heart. I told her I could make magic happen. And what did she see? She saw a cheap hoodlum in a tuxedo spit in her father's face. She saw that all my money, all my power, means nothing. She saw what they see when they look at us. All of us. "She knows who you are," Mamie insisted. "She knows you're a great man." She saw a weak man. I whispered, the words tasting like ash. And I saw the moment she stopped believing in me. It was then that I broke. For the first time since my brother died, I felt the sting of tears. I didn't sob. It was a silent, wrenching collapse from the inside. A single tear escaped and traced a path down my cheek. I turned away, ashamed for Mamie to see it, but she just held me, her strength a quiet anchor in my storm. Later, after Mamie had gone to bed, Junie found me in the same spot. He brought in a copy of the early edition of the Daily News. He put it on the desk without a word. The headline was something about the transit union, but tucked away in a gossip column by Walter Winchell was a small item. "Which Harlem big shot got the cold shoulder from a certain East Side impresario tonight? Seems some doors, no matter how much green is flashed, stay firmly shut. A lesson in humility for the uptown crowd." It was a small thing, a meaningless piece of gossip, but it felt like a second slap. The false alarm. The world wasn't just content to humiliate me in private, it was broadcasting my weakness. I imagined Elise's friends reading it, whispering about it at school. The humiliation was now public record. My failure was codified in newsprint. I crumpled the paper in my fist. "Find out everything about him, Junie," I said, my voice scraped raw. "Jules Podell. His partners, his suppliers, his political protection, who he pays, who he cheats. Find the rot. I want to know where he sleeps, what he eats, who he loves. I want to know what he fears." Junie just nodded. "Consider it done, Bumpy." But as he left, a deeper, colder fear took root in my heart. What if this wasn't about Podell anymore? What if the damage was already done, in a way I couldn't fix with threats or violence? I went upstairs to check on Elise. I stood outside her bedroom door, listening. There was no sound. I slowly, quietly, turned the knob. The room was empty. The window was wide open, the curtains fluttering in the cold night breeze. On her perfectly made bed was the pale blue dress, folded neatly. Beside it, a note. It contained only 3 words. "I'm sorry, Daddy." The search had begun. October 13th, 1961, 2:15 a.m. Astor Row, Harlem. Panic is a cold fire. It burns away reason, leaving only the raw, jagged edge of fear. My daughter was gone. My 16-year-old princess, out in the New York night. The note was an apology, but it felt like an accusation. "I'm sorry for being a disappointment. I'm sorry for being the reason you were shamed." My failure had not just broken her heart, it had driven her from her home. "Junie." My roar shook the quiet house. He was there in an instant, his coat still on. I thrust the note at him. "She's gone. Elise is gone." The color drained from his face. "Mr. Johnson, all hands," I commanded, the kingpin taking over, the broken father shoved into a back room of my mind. "Wake everyone up. Every man we have on the street. I want every corner of this borough turned upside down. Check the bus terminals, Grand Central, Penn Station. Call our people in the Port Authority. I want eyes on every bridge and tunnel out of Manhattan." My mind was a machine, clicking through possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. She was a good girl, a sheltered girl. She didn't know the streets. Not my streets, and certainly not the streets beyond Harlem. She was prey. "Start with her friends," I ordered, pacing my study like a caged panther. "Call them. I don't care what time it is. Wake their parents. Be polite, but be firm. Find out where she might go. A place she talked about. A secret hideaway. Anything." "What do we tell them?" Junie asked, his voice steady, a rock for me to lean on. "Tell them she went for a walk to clear her head and hasn't come back. Tell them we're worried. Don't mention, last night, the shame was still there, a hot coal in my throat." Within 30 minutes, My home was transformed into a command center. Phones rang incessantly. Men I trusted with my life came and went, their faces grim, taking orders and spreading out into the city's veins. I had an army, and I had mobilized it not for a turf war or a shipment, but to find one lost girl. October 13th, 1961. 5:47 a.m. A diner on 125th Street. No sleep. Just endless cups of black coffee that did nothing to quell the tremor in my hands. The first reports were trickling in. Nothing. Her friends were hysterical, none of them having any idea where she could be. They said she'd been so excited about her birthday, about going to the Copacabana. They said she adored her father. Each word was another twist of the knife. A false lead came in around 6 a.m. A patrolman on my payroll thought he saw a girl matching Elise's description getting on a bus at the Port Authority headed for Philadelphia. For a half hour, my world shifted. I imagined her running to a distant relative, safe, just needing space. I sent 2 cars screaming down the New Jersey Turnpike to intercept the bus. It was a dead end. A college girl who looked vaguely like her. The hope, so brief and bright, plunged me into an even deeper despair. The sun began to rise, casting a sick, gray light over the city. A city that had swallowed my daughter whole. My power, my reach, felt like a joke. I could move $1 million in illicit cash across town in an hour, but I couldn't find my own child. The system I had built was designed to control crime, to profit from vice, to protect my territory. It was not designed for this. It was a predator's network, and I had just released a lamb into it. October 13th, 1961. 11:20 a.m. My study, Astor Row. Mamie sat in a chair, silent, her Bible open in her lap, though her eyes were not on the pages. She was praying. I couldn't pray. To whom would I speak? A God I had spent a lifetime ignoring? What could I possibly ask for that I hadn't already tried to buy or take for myself? A new report came in. A street informant, a junkie named Weasel, had seen a girl, new to the neighborhood, crying near a tenement on 112th and Lenox. Said she looked like she didn't belong, said a man named Silas had started talking to her. Silas, a low-level parasite who sold cheap heroin, the garbage that the Italian families let seep into the edges of my territory. My rules were clear. No dope in the heart of Harlem, not near the schools, not near the homes. But the edges were always frayed. Where is this Silas now? I demanded into the phone, my voice a low growl. He operates out of a shooting gallery on 114th Street. Junie's voice crackled back. The old apartment building, the one they were supposed to tear down. A shooting gallery. The words hit me like a physical blow. My daughter. My brilliant, poetic, sweet 16 Elise. In a place like that. It was impossible. Unthinkable. But the timeline fit. The location was close enough. The description of a lost, crying girl, it was her. Junie, I said, my voice breaking. Get the doctor. Dr. Ramsey. Tell him to meet me there. Bring a medical bag. Everything he has. And bring 4 of our best men. No guns showing. We go in quiet. This is not a raid. This is an extraction. I hung up the phone and looked at Mamie. She saw the look on my face and a sob escaped her lips. Ellsworth, have you found her? I think so. I said, my heart a block of ice. Pray, Mamie. Pray I'm wrong. But I knew I wasn't. My failure at the Copacabana hadn't just been a lesson in racism. It had been a shove. A shove that sent my daughter tumbling from the safe pedestal I had built for her, right into the gutter of the world I commanded. October 13th, 1961. 12:35 p.m. A tenement building, 114th Street, Harlem. The stench hit us before we were even through the door. It was the smell of human decay, stale sweat, urine, cheap wine, and the sickly sweet, metallic odor of cooked heroin. The building was a carcass, its windows boarded up like vacant eyes, its hallways a throat choked with filth and debris. This was the dark underside of my kingdom, a place I knew existed but never, ever visited. A place my policies were supposed to contain, to keep away from the good people, the families, my family. Junie and 2 of my men, heavy-set and silent, flanked me. Dr. Ramsey, a man I kept on a generous retainer for patching up bullet wounds with no questions asked, followed close behind, his face pale, his black leather bag clutched in his hand. We moved up the stairs, our footsteps echoing in the tomb-like silence. The silence was the worst part. It was broken only by the occasional groan from behind a closed door, the sound of a life being unspooled in slow, miserable motion. On the third floor, we found the door. It was slightly ajar. From within came a low murmur of voices and a faint, tinny sound of a radio playing jazz. I pushed the door open. The scene inside was a Hieronymus Bosch painting of urban despair. The room was dark, the only light coming from a single, grime-covered window. Mattresses lay on the floor, occupied by skeletal figures in various states of narcotic oblivion. A few were awake, their eyes listless, their bodies emaciated. The air was thick enough to chew. Syringes, spoons, and scraps of cotton littered every surface. And in the center of the room, on a filthy mattress, sat Silas. He was a gaunt man with track marks running up his arms like railway lines. He was talking, whispering to a figure huddled next to him. The figure was a girl. Her back was to me. She was wearing a simple blouse and skirt I didn't recognize, but I recognized the slope of her shoulders. I recognized the way her hair fell. My heart stopped. My breath caught in my lungs. It couldn't be. Elise. The name was a strangled whisper, a prayer. The girl flinched. She turned her head slowly, so slowly. It was her. But it wasn't. Her eyes, those bright, intelligent eyes that had been filled with awe just last night, were now glassy, unfocused, the pupils pinned to tiny black dots. Her face was pale, streaked with tears and dirt. There was a small, dark bruise blooming on her cheekbone. But worst of all was the expression. The blankness. The emptiness I had seen in the car last night was now a vast, terrifying void. She didn't seem to recognize me. She just stared, her mouth slightly agape. My gaze flickered to Silas, and then to the needle resting on the crate beside him. My mind, my entire being, fractured into a million pieces. The rage that rose in me was a white-hot, biblical force. It was a rage that could burn cities to the ground. I took a step forward, every muscle in my body screaming for violence, for a brutal, final retribution. But then I looked back at Elise, at my daughter, and the rage was extinguished by a wave of grief so profound it brought me to my knees. I had done this. My pride, my world, my failure. I had led her here. This was my harvest. Silas finally looked up, his dope-addled brain slowly registering our presence. Fear flickered in his eyes as he recognized me. Bumpy man, I didn't know. I didn't even look at him. My universe had contracted to the small, broken figure of my child. Get him out of here, I said to my men, my voice a dead, hollow thing. They grabbed Silas, who yelped in terror, and dragged him from the room. I would deal with him later. His fate would be a new legend in the neighborhood, a cautionary tale whispered for decades. But right now, he was nothing. I knelt on the filthy floor in my expensive suit, the grit and grime digging into the fine wool. Elise, I said again, my voice trembling. Baby girl, it's Daddy. I'm here. She blinked, a flicker of something, a ghost of recognition in the narcotic fog. Daddy, she mumbled, her voice thick, slurred. I made a mistake. A single tear rolled down her cheek, cutting a clean path through the grime. No, baby. I choked out, reaching for her, my hands shaking so badly I could barely control them. No, I made the mistake. I'm so sorry. Dr. Ramsey was beside me now, opening his bag. We need to get her out of here, Bumpy. Now, I looked at my daughter, lost in a hell of my own making. This wasn't just an extraction. This was a rescue mission into the heart of my own darkness. I gathered her into my arms. She was so light, fragile as a bird. As I carried her out of that room, leaving the stench and the despair behind, I confronted the ugliest truth of my life. The empire I had built to protect her was the very thing that had poisoned her. October 13th, 1961, 1:30 p.m. A safe house, Harlem. The safe house was an anonymous apartment I kept on the Upper West Side, far from the familiar streets of Harlem. It was clean, sterile, and impersonal. I laid Elise down on a bed with fresh, white sheets. She was barely conscious, drifting in and out of a heroin-induced haze. Mamie was there, having been summoned by Junie. The moment she saw Elise, a sound of pure, animal grief was torn from her throat. She rushed to the bedside, cradling our daughter's face, weeping. Dr. Ramsey went to work. He was a creature of the underworld, accustomed to patching up gangsters, but he was a competent physician. He took her vitals, his face a grim mask. Her pulse is thready, her breathing is shallow. She's been given a strong dose, Bumpy, probably her first. The shock to her system is immense. Did she take it willingly? The question hung in the air. Did it matter? I had pushed her out the window, and Silas had been waiting at the bottom. Does it change the treatment? I asked, my voice flat. No, Ramsey said, preparing a syringe of his own. But it will change the recovery. The next 72 hours are going to be hell. For her. And for you. He administered a shot, something to counteract the opiate. We can't take her to a hospital. They'd have to report it. The police, the papers, it would destroy her. And me. But he was right. The scandal would follow her for the rest of her life. We were on our own. What do you mean, hell? Mamie asked, her voice trembling as she wiped Elisa's forehead with a cool cloth. Withdrawal, Ramsey said bluntly. Her body is going to scream for more of the poison. She'll have fevers, chills, vomiting, muscle spasms, horrific pain. And the psychological part, the paranoia, the hallucinations, the despair. It's a descent into madness. She'll beg you. She'll curse you. She'll say anything to get you to make it stop. You can't give in. Not for 1 second. I looked at my daughter, so still and peaceful under the drug's influence, and tried to imagine the storm that was coming. A 3-day war to win back her soul. I'll stay with her, I said. No, Ellsworth, Mamie countered, her voice gaining a steely edge I had not heard in years. This is a mother's work. You go fix what you broke. Her words were not an absolution. They were a directive, an order. She was right. I had 2 battles to fight. One was here, in this room, for Elisa's life. The other was out there, against the system that had done this. Against the casual, venomous racism of a man like Podell, and against the poison I allowed to flow at the edges of my own domain. I left the room and walked into the living area where Junie was waiting. Silas, I asked. He's being educated, Junie said, his meaning clear and cold. He says he found her crying. Said she was talking about not being good enough. He offered her an escape. He says he gave her the first taste for free. He's a ghoul, Bumpy. He's a symptom, I said, the thought clarifying in my mind. Podell is the disease. Killing Podell would be easy. And unsatisfying. It would be just another gangland slaying. It wouldn't change the fact that men like him held the power to humiliate and wound, to set a chain of events like this in motion. It wouldn't change the world that had hurt my daughter. What do you want to do about him? Junie asked. The club. What shocked New York? I murmured, thinking of the future headlines. It wouldn't be a murder. It would be something worse. Something systemic. I would not use a gun. I would use my real power, money, information, and the intricate web of corruption that held the city together. I would turn the system against itself. Give me the files, I said. Everything we have on every city inspector, every liquor license official, every cop on the take in the 17th precinct. Give me the ledgers from our bookies who take bets from Podell's suppliers. I don't want to break his kneecaps. I want to break his foundations. I want to own him, Junie. And then I want to give him away to the feds on a silver platter. I'm going to burn his whole world down using their matches. It was a declaration of a different kind of war. A war that would inevitably draw the attention of powers far greater than a rival family. A war that I might not walk away from. But as I heard the first pained moan from the bedroom, as Elisa's withdrawal began, I knew it was a price I was willing to pay. I had failed as a father by trying to shield her from the world. Now, I would try to redeem myself by changing a piece of it, no matter the cost. October 14th, 1961. 3 a.m. The safe house. The screaming started just after midnight. It wasn't a scream of terror, but of pure, biological agony. I stood outside Elisa's bedroom door, forbidden by Mamie from entering, and every cry felt like a hot poker jabbed into my ear, straight into my soul. I could hear her thrashing, the sounds of her body convulsing on the bed. I could hear Mamie's voice, a steady, soothing murmur of prayer and love, a constant counterpoint to Elisa's torment. Please, Mama, make it stop. It hurts. My bones are breaking. Please. I leaned my head against the cool wood of the door, my eyes squeezed shut. Dr. Ramsey had been clear. This was the peak. The body rebelling, every nerve ending frayed and firing at once. I had seen men, hard men, go through this. I'd seen them chew through their own lips, beat their heads against concrete walls. And this was my child, my sweet, gentle Elise. Junie sat in a chair across the hall, watching me, his face a mask of loyal sorrow. He didn't offer platitudes. He just sat witness, a silent testament to my vigil. "Why don't you get some rest, Bumpy?" he said softly after a particularly violent bout of screaming from the room. "Rest?" I laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "How can I rest when she's in there? This is my fault, Junie. I stood there and let that man break her spirit. I should have, I don't know, I should have torn his throat out with my teeth right there in the lobby. And been shot dead or in jail before your family was even in a cab," Junie countered, his logic a cold splash of water. "You did what you had to do. You protected them by leaving." "Some protection," I muttered, gesturing at the door. "This is the result of my protection." The door opened and Mamie appeared, her face etched with exhaustion, but her eyes were fierce. "She's asking for you, Ellsworth." I pushed past her into the room. The sight was devastating. Elise was drenched in sweat, her hair plastered to her skull. Her body was curled into a fetal position, trembling violently. She was retching into a basin Mamie held for her. When she saw me, her eyes, wild and desperate, locked onto mine. "Daddy," she rasped, her voice raw. "Daddy, please. You can make it stop. You can do anything. Just one more. A little one. To make the pain go away. Then I'll be good. I promise. Please, Daddy." It was the devil's own bargain. She was appealing to the very image of me she'd had before that night, the all-powerful father who could fix anything. She was using my love for her as a weapon against herself. I knelt by the bed, my heart shattering. I took her trembling hand. It was cold and clammy. "I can't do that, baby girl," I said, my voice thick with unshed tears. "I will never, ever let that poison touch you again. I know it hurts. God, I know. But you have to fight. You are stronger than this pain. You are my daughter. You are a queen. And we are going to get through this. I am right here. I'm not leaving." She began to cry, deep, racking sobs of despair and agony. "I hate you. I hate you," she screamed, trying to pull her hand away. "I know," I whispered, holding on tighter. "You can hate me. You can scream at me. But I'm not letting you go." For the next 48 hours, that room was our universe. Mamie and I worked in shifts, holding her, cleaning her, speaking to her, enduring her curses and her pleas. We were a two-person army laying siege to the fortress of addiction that had claimed our daughter. Dr. Ramsey came and went, monitoring her heart, administering fluids, offering grim encouragement. During the brief lulls when Elise would fall into a fitful, twitching sleep, I would retreat to the living room and wage my other war. Men brought me ledgers, surveillance reports, photographs. I sat at the dining table, a general planning a campaign, my mind compartmentalized. On one side, the desperate father. On the other, the ruthless kingpin. We found Podell's weaknesses. They were legion. He was skimming profits from his silent partners in the Genovese family. He was paying off 2 specific city inspectors to ignore a dozen fire code violations. His meat supplier was a front for an illegal gambling operation. It was a house of cards, and I was gathering the names of every person holding a corner. By the morning of October 16th, the storm in the bedroom began to break. Elise's fever went down. The spasms lessened. She was weak, hollowed out, but she was lucid. She slept for 6 hours straight, a real, peaceful sleep. When she woke, Mamie was spoon-feeding her broth. She looked at me, standing in the doorway. The wildness was gone from her eyes. In its place was a deep, profound shame. "Daddy," she whispered. I walked to her bed and sat on the edge. "I'm here, baby. I'm so sorry," she cried, the tears now of remorse, not pain. "Chill. No more apologies," I said, stroking her hair. "This is behind us now. We're going to get you well. All the way well." That afternoon, I found a place. A private clinic in Connecticut, discreet and expensive, that specialized in nervous exhaustion for the wealthy. It was a nascent form of rehabilitation. I made the arrangements. A new life, a new start, far from the city that had almost consumed her. That same evening, an anonymous package was delivered to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. Another was delivered to the office of the New York State Liquor Authority. And a third found its way to a certain Cape regime in the Genovese family. They contained ledgers, photographs, and a detailed map of Jules Podell's empire of corruption. I had not laid a hand on him, but I had signed his death warrant, both figurative and, quite possibly, literal. What happened next would indeed shock New York. But the real victory was the quiet breathing of my daughter in the next room. December 28, 1961. The Copacabana, 10 East 60th Street, Manhattan. The headlines had been sensational. Copa King indicted. Racketeering, tax evasion charges, mob war fears, A.S. Genovese family cleans house, club shuttered. Liquor authority cites massive violations. Jules Podell was ruined. His club was dark, its iconic sign unlit. His partners had turned on him. His political protection had evaporated, and the federal government was preparing a case that would put him away for 20 years. He was a ghost, a cautionary tale. No one ever connected it to me. They saw it as a convergence of bad luck and mob politics. They didn't see the hand of a father avenging his daughter. I stood across the street, bundled in a heavy overcoat, watching the darkened facade. Junie was beside me. There was no triumph in it. Only a cold, grim satisfaction. I had broken him, but it didn't fix what was broken in my family. Elise was in Connecticut. We spoke on the phone every Sunday. Her voice was getting stronger. She was writing poetry again. She was healing. But there was a distance, a chasm created that night that we had not yet learned how to cross. My systemic attack on Podell, however, had unforeseen consequences. By handing over so much detailed information about the city's corrupt infrastructure, information only a man like me could possess, I had put myself on the federal radar in a new and dangerous way. I had shown them my playbook. They knew the kind of power I wielded, and it made them nervous. Robert F. Kennedy's Justice Department was on a crusade, and I had just painted a target on my own back. May 4, 1963. Federal Courthouse, Foley Square, Manhattan. It took them a year and a half, but they finally got me. Not for murder or racketeering. Those charges never stuck. They got me for the same thing they got Capone for: tax evasion. It was a clean, simple charge, impossible to beat. My own meticulous ledgers, the source of my power, became my undoing. The U.S. attorney, a hungry young man named Robert Morgenthau, made his career on my conviction. I stood before the judge, impassive. Mamie was in the front row, her face a stoic mask of grief. Elise was not there. We had decided it would be too much for her. She was home from the clinic, enrolled in a quiet boarding school, rebuilding her life piece by piece. My presence would only cast a shadow she was just beginning to escape. The judge sentenced me to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. The press went wild. Harlem kingpin toppled. But as the marshals led me away, I felt a strange sense of peace. My war against Podell had demanded a price. This was it. A sacrifice. I had traded my freedom for a chance at my daughter's soul. In my mind, it was a bargain I'd make again. They sent me to the Rock. Alcatraz, the most secure prison in America. A place for men the government wanted to disappear. 1963 to 1973. Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary / United States Penitentiary, Springfield, Missouri. The years passed in a monotonous, soul-crushing rhythm of steel doors, head counts, and the ceaseless roar of the San Francisco Bay. My life, once a sprawling map of a city I commanded, was now confined to a 5-by-9-foot cell. My power was gone. My name was just a number. But a connection remained. Letters. They were my lifeline. Mamie wrote every week, detailing the quiet life she was living, managing my legitimate businesses, holding the family together. And Elise wrote. At first, her letters were tentative, filled with the stilted formality of a stranger. October 12, 1964. Dear Father, I hope this letter finds you well. School is fine. I received an A on my essay about the poetry of Langston Hughes. The autumn leaves here in Massachusetts are quite beautiful. I think of you. Sincerely, Elise. I would read these letters until the paper grew soft and the ink began to fade. I wrote back, long letters filled with the stories of my own youth, with my thoughts on the books I was reading: Dostoevsky, Dumas, W. E. B. Du Bois. I never mentioned my guilt. I never mentioned that night. I simply tried to be a father on paper, to give her the parts of my mind that were worthy of her. Slowly, over years, the letters changed. The salutation shifted from father to daddy, She told me about her friends, about a boy she liked, about her dreams of becoming a teacher. She sent me photographs. Elise at her high school graduation, a confident young woman in a cap and gown. Elise on the campus of Howard University, her arms full of books. Elise with her first class of third graders in a school in Washington, D.C. I watched my daughter grow up in snapshots and paragraphs. I tacked her photos to the cold stone wall of my cell, creating a small, sacred collage of a life I was missing. I saw the light return to her eyes. The haunted, empty look was gone, replaced by a warmth and a purpose that filled me with a quiet, painful pride. In one letter, dated sometime in 1971, she wrote something that I would carry with me for the rest of my days. Dear Daddy, a student in my class asked me today who my hero was, and I told them it was my father. They asked why. I didn't tell them you were a king or a powerful man. I told them you were the man who taught me that true strength isn't about never falling down. It's about what you do to help the people you love get back up. I know what you sacrificed, and I love you for it. Your daughter, Elise. I wept in my cell that night. Not tears of grief or shame, but of gratitude. My sacrifice had been seen. My penance had been accepted. My legacy was not my empire. It was her. I was paroled in the summer of 1973 after serving 10 years. My health was failing, worn down by prison life. I was no longer the imposing figure who had dominated Harlem. I was an old man, stooped and gray. July 18, 1973, 2:40 p.m., Astor Row, Harlem. Junie, older now, his hair flecked with silver, drove me home. He was quiet, respectful. The city had changed. Harlem had changed. It was louder, angrier, ravaged by a heroin epidemic far worse than anything I had ever allowed. My old kingdom was in ruins. We pulled up to the brownstone. It looked the same, a timeless anchor in a changing world. Mamie was waiting at the door. We held each other for a long time, two old partners who had weathered the storm. She's inside, Mamie whispered. She came up from D.C. to see you. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was more nervous than I had been on my sentencing day. I walked into the house that had been my home, and there she was. Elise stood in the living room, by the fireplace. She was no longer the girl I remembered, but a woman, 28 years old, poised, elegant, with a gentle strength in her eyes that reminded me so much of her mother. She was beautiful. She was whole. We just looked at each other for a moment, across the 10 lost years, across the chasm of pain and sacrifice. The silence was thick with everything unsaid. Then she smiled, a small, radiant smile. She took a step forward, and then another, until she was standing right in front of me. She reached out and gently touched my face, her fingers tracing the new lines etched there by time and prison. Hi, Pop, she said, her voice soft and clear. The simple word, one she had never used before, was everything. It was forgiveness. It was acceptance. It was love. It was the end of the long, dark night that had begun at the door of the Copacabana. I pulled my daughter into my arms, and for the first time in a decade, I was truly home. The kingpin was gone, his empire turned to dust. But the father had survived, and that was a legacy that would endure.